the Chief Revenue Officer. I'm the Revenue Officer for ModernLoop, and we have with us here a very, very special guest, Theresa, who's joining us from Zerocater and co-hosting this webinar with me. Theresa, I'm going to kick it off to you for a second, just to introduce yourself and then have you introduce Zerocater.
Yeah, so thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. Obviously a big ModernLoop fan, so it was very easy to say yes when you guys asked me. But I'm the Director of Recruiting for Zerocater. I'm based in Austin, Texas. I've been at Zerocater for 6.5 years. Prior to that, I've worked at larger companies. I worked at Meta. I worked at Amazon. And so really love the startup life. Just kind of found my sweet spot here at Zerocater. And just to tell you a little bit about what we do, we are basically the Uber of corporate catering. And so we are able to provide meals for events, recurring meal programs, and really actually plan meals that employees love and look forward to, instead of just like, what's for lunch today? So, so it's really cool to work for a company that I'm super passionate about, and to be growing right now has been even better. So
that is so wonderful, Theresa. And I think that kind of brings me to the next question. Tell us about your team. It was definitely very unique for me to hear, and interesting and exciting for me to hear the way that you've structured your team. And so would love for you to kind of elaborate on that a little bit.
yeah, so we have a very, very small recruiting team. We've got 4 people on our team right now. We have had to hire a ton, hire them. It's been a really, really interesting market out there. And one of the things I think that's interesting about our team is that my recruiters, we do everything full cycle, from posting jobs to sourcing to scheduling. We don't have recruiting coordinators, to anything from negotiating to offer letters. And our HR team is lean as well, so we actually help a lot with the onboarding process. We launch the packets in Paylocity, which is the payroll system that we use, and basically are with our candidates from step 1 of the initial contact with them all the way to their first day on the job. So, I really love getting to be that close to my candidates. Obviously, that also means that there are challenges with time, and we can be spread thin at times. And then also, being at a startup, we get pulled into a lot of other things. One of my projects recently, which was really fun, but again, still, a bit of a time commitment. I planned the holiday party for our Austin office. And so that, of course, takes time. But we had about a 55% growth this year. And we did have a little bit larger team starting out the year. So what was interesting too is we've had to do more with less. We thought we were going to be hiring a bit less, and that number went a bit higher, and we haven't increased the headcount on my team. And so we've had to, really work very smart, not hard. We've had to work hard too, but also just being very, ruthless in prioritization and how we spend our time. And then we also have a very unique employee population in the types of roles that we hire for. And even as the director on the team, I actually still have a full workload. It just wouldn't even be an option for me not to recruit based on the roles that we have. And so sometimes I also kind of hop around a little bit, and I'll work in different departments and just kind of see where I can help improve our process, and make sure that we're hiring great candidates. And then also a lot of interview training. Sometimes when I've had newer recruiters, newer hiring managers, I have to be able to kind of step in and help guide things a little bit and just help keep things on track. And then, this year we hired 190 people total. But as I mentioned, we have a very unique population where we could be hiring anything from an executive to a software engineer to sales and marketing and some of the more general type of roles you might see in tech companies. But we also have some very food specific roles as well, being a food company, which are definitely very niche. We have roles that I've never hired at other companies before. And then we also have a very large part-time population, which they're called our on-site specialists, and they're at our client sites during the durations of the meal services as they're taking place. And so those are part-time roles. So with that does come a little bit more turnover. Even within that employee population, there's a lot of diversity there in terms of sometimes we have students that we're hiring. We've had folks who are retired. We have people who maybe mothers who just want to work part-time and have some income. So again, just lots of variance, and my team is amazing and is we joke that everybody has to be the Swiss Army knife because we're all doing so many different things. And yeah, and this year we had when I saw this number, I was blown away. We've had 5,793 interviews, which is a lot. We've been doing a lot of interviewing this year. We've met a lot of new people. So
It is. Oh my God. I was, yeah, I think I fell off my chair when I saw this number. 5,793 interviews is what you schedule, which is so much. Clearly, you're operating with such a lean team, Theresa. Tell us your secret. How's your team doing it?
So, well, I would say there's really not just like one secret. I think there's also kind of that like attitude and approach that you have to take where you say, we're going to figure this out, right? Sometimes when you just stand there and you look at the mountain ahead of you, it can look very daunting. And sometimes you just have to start kind of putting one foot in front of the other. Obviously, my tenure here has been helpful because I've been able to really help streamline our processes and make sure that we have a very efficient process, also a very repeatable process. So if I have a recruiter who's working on hiring for our food experience team, and then they have to move over to sales, the process is the same. And that's really helpful for our interviewers to be able to know, because they might be on multiple interview loops. As mentioned, we don't have a lot of interviewers, and that's a big challenge that we run into. We don't want to wear people out. We don't want to give them, too many interviews to be conducting. And so we really try to cross-train and again, keep things very simple and streamlined so that it's a very repeatable recipe, right? If you have one team and they're making chocolate chip cookies with 2 sticks of butter, and the other team on the West Coast is doing it with one, right? Whoever's ordering those ingredients isn't going to know how much to order. So I try to keep things not necessarily robotic, but again, very simple and streamlined. So that anybody can jump in. And then that way also, like if I have a hiring manager, they don't say, oh, I only want Theresa to work on my roles, or I only want Amy to work on my roles, or Michelle. They're going to be able to take anybody from my team and get a consistent experience across the board. And it's also easier for my team to jump in and help out. And there obviously are variances between some of our processes. So, obviously we, it doesn't mean that we're following the exact same thing for each role. There are those variances that we factor in, but overall, again, people sort of know what to expect. So tools are probably the biggest piece of it. Making sure that you have the right suite of tools for your organization, not only from your ATS, but your scheduling. We rely incredibly heavily on ModernLoop, and I can't imagine us not having that tool to help us out with scheduling. Scheduling used to be like one of the least favorite things in my job because I would have to schedule, and then sometimes you got to reschedule, and I would be like, that's almost worse than getting like an offer decline sometimes. But it's ModernLoop's made our life so much easier. And of course, you need your other tools, whether it's your sourcing tools where you're posting jobs. But again, just having something that is extremely reliable really helps a lot. Also proactive planning. So trying to anticipate challenges and any bottlenecks that might come up, and just really be constantly problem solving, right? That's been a really big theme for my team recently. not just in, not with even within my team, but also with hiring managers too, is like, if we're continually running into this problem, what can we do to eliminate this in the future or make this run more smoothly? And I think sometimes teams get really busy and they just kind of sweep things under the rug a little bit, right? And what happens is, maybe you're only 1 or 2 degrees off, but what happens a year or two down the road? Now we're 5, 6, 7 degrees off, and it's a lot harder to course correct when you're further off than if you're just a couple degrees. And so that's one thing that with my team is we try to really keep things in check. And then also sometimes, you have to say no to things. Like I've had hiring managers say like, oh, well, my team really needs, we need, extra rounds of interviews. And sometimes we have to say, nope, first of all, my team doesn't have the bandwidth to take that on. And let's make sure that we're, really having an impact on what we're evaluating on and that we're getting the right information. We don't need to have 10 rounds of interviews. That's not going to change, who we hire. And if anything, it's just going to make candidates want to drop out of your process. So again, really being focused on the prize, which is what is the information that we need to move forward in the process, and focusing your time and activities on those things and trying to avoid things that are time wasters. And again, sometimes you do have to slow down and put air in the tires, because if you don't, you're going to have a blowout, and then you're going to have a much worse problem on your hands. Even if you have to slow down for a little second, you're slowing down so that ultimately you can speed up. So those are some of our, I would say, like high level ways that we're managing high volume.
Yeah, I think one of the things I heard from you, Theresa, that was really interesting is kind of your need for consistency, right? And so consistency in process, and as a result, consistency in candidate experience as well. And you've relied on that heavily as you've scaled. And I think that's just a really interesting tidbit for me to hear from.
Yeah, have a good process from the start, and then you don't have to fix it or change it later. And that was a very interesting thing that I saw at Amazon, because the company is so large that if you do have something that's slightly off, you might affect, and when I was there, I think they only had, and I'm going to say only had 900 recruiters. There was a lot more posts. This was back in 2014 or 2015. And, they had a lot more people in the recruiting team after that. So if you make a change, you're changing it for so many people. So it's so important to just really keep a good, solid process and be disciplined to following that process so that you don't have these off deviations. And like, there was a time I had transferred teams, and I remember having to like relearn stuff. And I'm like, but wait, we work at the same company. We're hiring the same jobs. This is strange. Why am I having to learn a whole new process? Because it was just a different group. So.
Right, which is actually brings me to the next slide.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's your journey itself is so interesting because you worked at really large companies like Amazon, and then worked at really high growth companies like Zerocater, right? And I think I guess, what does it look like? I think from being at an Amazon where your role is very defined, right? And there's very defined roles and responsibilities you have versus your role now at a high growth company where essentially you own every step of the recruiting process. Help us understand the similarities, the differences, kind of what that journey's been like for you.
Yeah. So it's definitely been very different. At Amazon, I focused mostly on engineering hiring. And even within that, it was, I think for the first 6 months there, I was hiring just SDE2s. And honestly, I got a little bit bored because I'm like, you kind of naturally will get robotic because you're doing that same phone screen over and over and over. And I think I had, was it like 93 phone screens before I got my first hire? It took like right at 3 months, and then I got like 2 hires, and you kind of only get a snapshot. And I wouldn't say necessarily like good or bad. I think it depends on what you enjoy doing, but I like to really get to know people and build teams and get to work closely with those teams. And so, being at a larger company, you own certain sections of the process, and then you're kind of handing the baton off. And I do think that sometimes that can leave an opportunity for candidates to sometimes get forgotten about, or, when you have 60 candidates in process at any time, it's harder to give kind of that personalized experience, and it's just kind of like, okay, get them in and then we'll figure it out later. And just making sure that you're matching people to the right teams. I would say it was almost like they were too big for their own good, right?
Right.
And then at a small company, you get to know your candidates from the very beginning. It definitely helps a lot with your negotiation when, you're the person there, crossing the finish line with them. You're not just standing there waiting for them, you're crossing it with them, and you can revert back to things that maybe got brought up in your conversation. Also, by even doing like the scheduling, it gives you these nice natural check-in points like, hey, I know you had some other opportunities you're interviewing for. Any updates? How are things shaping up, right? And even if you, at the very end, if you have a candidate that doesn't take your offer, you're actually more likely to get an honest and genuine response as to like why, right? And maybe it could be something like the commute, or maybe it did come down to compensation. It's not always compensation. I don't think that that's always what wins the candidate to the job, because again, there's other things, but that's what your job as the recruiter is, to really line up what are the motivations of the candidate, instead of just rushing them through a process, right? It's matchmaking to make sure that they're going to find success and happiness in the job. So I do think at a smaller company, there really is a big emphasis on quality of hire, right? Again, our teams are small. If somebody's not pulling their weight, it's felt by others, very easily. And then at larger organization, it does seem like it's a little bit more about like hiring numbers and goals. Sometimes things like attrition, but and I think kind of a newer metric that I think people are kind of starting to talk about, which is really important, is like your time to alignment. And you might get that when you're hiring like the same role over and over. But again, you might also like only really get to know that role versus how do other roles fit into your company. And when I've worked on other roles, it's always helped me better work on roles that I've been working on.
Right. Absolutely. And kind of, I think one of the things that personally for me stood out so much when you and I talked last was the impact you thought. And so obviously, you have an interesting setup in your team, right? Like, of course, extremely efficiently run team where recruiters are taking on roles of recruiting coordinators as well, right? And one of my questions to you, I don't know if you remember when we spoke first, was how do you think that impacts candidate experience, right? And so, yeah, I'd love for you to share that learning with the rest of this larger group as well. How do you think that has impacted candidate experience?
I think it impacts the candidate experience quite a bit, and in a positive way. And I think it also impacts the recruiter experience. Like, I kind of want to add that to this, because it becomes a lot more rewarding for even the recruiter and you feel more ownership and responsibility. And how do you not give a good candidate experience to something that you again, feel is your responsibility, instead of like, okay, well, I got this candidate here, now I'm handing them off to someone else. I think it does humanize things a bit more. And you do get to know that person more, and at the end of the day, they may choose your company, again, not just because that was the highest dollar offer, but again, could you match all the other motivations that they had? And I love being able to tell my candidates on my initial phone screen with them, hey, I'm going to be your main point of contact throughout the entire the entire process. So if you need anything at all, don't hesitate to reach out. So they know who to go to, right? And again, towards the end, maybe I have these really honest conversations with a candidate, and maybe my job isn't the right job for them, right? If I put them in the job that wasn't the top job for them, I'm just going to have to replace them anyway. So, I think I used to be much more earlier in my career a stickler about like, oh, I got to have this high close rate, and I want to, and you do want a high close rate, right? But you're not going to get every candidate, and sometimes you don't want every candidate, because if they're not going to be happy and successful in the role, like even if we want them, if they don't feel the same way about us, they're not going to come in and have the impact. And again, you're just going to have to rehire them, and we can't afford that, because we've got people who if you have a team of 7 and you lose one, and now you've got 6 people doing the work of 7 and interviewing, and then that new person that's going to come in and train or have to get trained does also take away from the team. So I think we have to be guarded of our own time and guarded of others. And it's funny because like a lot of bigger companies do very much like the recruiter sourcer model. And I just saw a lot of candidates slip away. And so I just always kind of wonder if that's just the most effective. But again, maybe also different type of candidate, right? Different type of company, different kind of profile. But I do really find it that, like I said, I do feel like candidates can feel more open and honest with you when they have a good relationship, or they might be willing to ask that question. And maybe it was something that like they just were afraid to ask. Maybe they need to leave early one day a week or something, and they just felt like they couldn't ask for that if, again, they didn't have that relationship with you. If like, hey, that's not a problem at all, I actually leave early on Tuesdays too, but let's check with your manager and make sure that works with them. Because there are things that we've been able to get across the finish line, but if people didn't feel like they could talk to you about it, you might not ever know that little thing that might have been slightly off that helped then things align properly.
Absolutely. Yeah. I remember you sharing that you thought it really hugely changed the candidate experience actually to have one point of contact. And that hadn't comprehended for me before you actually brought it up. And it's a really, really interesting perspective. And
Yeah. So
yeah.
wondering like, wait, who am I supposed to be talking to now? Or who's next? Like what is this process? So
Wonderful. I'd love to now move into, thank you so much, Theresa, for sharing all of this. I'd love to move to Q&A. I already see some questions coming up. For anyone else in the audience, if you have any questions, please feel free to type them in and we will take these questions live with Theresa. Theresa, I'm taking the first question live. What are your recruiters' rec loads?
So it depends on a number of things, right? We are constantly load balancing and shifting things around. But if they have full-time roles, it could be anywhere between 5 and 10. And again, we might fill them and then right back up, pop a couple more, or we're expanding into a new market. That's been the biggest one. And of course, the challenge there is now we're going into new markets where we've never hired. We have no presence, no brand presence, right? Nobody knows who we are. And that's been probably the biggest challenge. And then for our part-time, they might have anywhere between 15 to 20 at any given time. But again, it's very constant, that number. It's like, like Michelle, she might hire 5 candidates a week, 5, 6 new recs are popping up per week too. So it almost kind of balances itself out because there's a kind of a constant flow of needs. And like I said, a lot of that has been because of expansion into new markets, which also means we're having to get payroll set up in new states. So that means I'm talking to finance, I'm talking to our HR team, looking at any of the legalities, whether it's stuff we have to have in our offer letters or so there's a lot of stuff that even goes, like I said, even just outside of just the hiring and recruiting. So
Absolutely. And a question from somebody, I know you'd mentioned tools being a big part of what helps you be efficient. So a question about what are the tools are you using along with ModernLoop?
Yeah, so we have greenhouses or ATS. Obviously, ModernLoop has been a huge lift for us. We also use HireFlow for our messaging. That's been an excellent messaging platform for us. We've had a really great partnership with them as well. We also use Seekout to do our sourcing. We actually don't use LinkedIn. That is one tool we don't use. It's very expensive. And again, we have such a variance in the type of hires that we make. We do use Indeed. We also do some job postings as well. And then actually recently, we've started posting some of our part-time roles on OfferUp. And we've even found some success there. So again, we're also experimenting. And that's another thing that we start to look at is like, what works in what market. And so, different things work in different places and according to different jobs. But yeah, we definitely have I would say like a pretty, you don't want to have like 100 tools either, right? Because like, I'll be honest, that's vendor management. I'm doing calls and we're doing contract. It'll be like, what, didn't we just do this? We're doing this all over again, So I think that's been really healthy for our team. So.
Wonderful. Thank you, Theresa. I'm going to take another question live. There seems to be a trend to have recruiters perform their core responsibilities at the highest level while also drive them to run projects and initiatives in parallel. How do you balance that, especially with the lean team?
That's a really good question. I sometimes I don't know how I balance it. Sometimes I just do it. You know, I actually run our diversity and inclusion task force. Like I said, I was also planning our holiday party. Sometimes I'm driving equipment to new hires and shipping out laptops. You know, you have to really, really ruthlessly prioritize. And like I said, you have to push back on things. And like one thing I've learned is like there's ways to kind of say no to things sometimes without saying no to things. So for example, my boss might come to me, and my boss is our CEO. I have a great boss, by the way. And I'm very lucky because again, I can be very open with him and be like, hey, this is not going well, right? Or hey, we did this and this didn't work out, so now we're backtracking. And so I'm always very transparent about things, but sometimes he's very ambitious, and so he might say, you know, hey, can we start doing this? And I would say, sure, absolutely, we can definitely do that. However, if you want me to start working on that, this I might have to put on the back burner, or something's going to have to go on the back burner for, again, the quality to happen. So, and then also prioritization of jobs, right? Because every hiring manager is going to come to you and say, my job's the most important. If we don't fill this job, the ship is going down, right? But we, like right now, we're prioritizing where is there a hole versus where is there, say, a net new hire. And even on that, sometimes maybe that net new hire might really be needed because that role might take a little while for a ramp up. And maybe we know that we've got a really big client coming on and we need more people to be planning meals. And again, they've got to learn our tools that we use internally. So it is a balancing act. And again, there's definitely projects that I would like to do and spend more time on, like reporting. But also I've started to really learn to, again, if you just try to be very tactical and just try to get through your to-do list, sometimes you do have to stop and pause and say, hey, I'm only going to recruit on two recs right now, because I have to solve these problems that are happening. Because again, that's going to ultimately, solving those problems will pay dividends. Even if you feel like you had to slow down just a little bit, you will get further ahead.
Absolutely. And I think that was really, really interesting for me to hear. I mean, essentially, it sounds like you've done a really good job of managing up, right? And helping all the different stakeholders that you work with really prioritize for your team, right? And
Mm-hmm.
that's a big part of what's helping you operate at this level. Um, I'm going to pick up this question because it is the topic for the webinar. So, how do you keep your team from experiencing burnout?
So that is a challenge. I probably could do better at this, as I do absorb a lot. I will take on a lot more. I really do try to protect my team from certain things, because I don't want them, like I work a lot of hours. I do. And but I love what I do. Obviously I wouldn't do it if I didn't enjoy what I did. But I really do try to guard my team from that a little bit. And again, I try to work with them on how to be very efficient. I would say that is my superpower, is being organized. I color code my calendar. I'm always planning. I always plan for the next day. I make sure I plan like the appropriate amount of time to do things. So if I have, you know, a task that's 10 minutes, I'm not going to put 30 minutes on my calendar. I'll put 10 minutes to do that. And that also pushes me to say, okay, I can do this in 10 minutes. But you also have to give yourself enough time to do things too, right? Don't give yourself 10 minutes to do a phone screen that's going to take 30 minutes, right? Also, there are times where if you just start to realize too, a candidate's not a great candidate, you know, how do you get off that phone call but still be polite? And so I'm coaching my team on that too. Like, spending your time with the wrong person is keeping you from spending time with the right person, and maybe weeding people out a little bit. One thing I've also been working with my team is like, if you aren't sure on a resume, send it to me. I'd rather you take 30 seconds of my time, or get a second opinion from anybody on the team, right, who's hired that role. Because even I noticed we've had some hiring managers that kind of just say yes to everybody, right? Well, we can't screen 100 candidates. You're saying yes to literally every person that we're sending you, right? And when clearly some of these candidates aren't, there's some red flags, right? And so if I can save a little bit of time for my team and review resumes, then again, if say there were 3 resumes that I said no to that my team was on the fence about, and I said, no, I wouldn't screen these, that's an hour and a half back in their day. So we try to help each other out so that there isn't burnout on them as well. And I also really encourage people to take time off. I do keep a tally of people taking time off because I want to make sure that those that aren't taking time off, that I'm encouraging them to take time off. Or if they ask for time off when somebody else asks for time off and that other person maybe's had more time off, I might have to prioritize, because we also have a rule. I can't have more than 2 people out. If I do that, I'm the only one here. So, it's too much to cover. So I, again, I always tell my team, I don't expect you to work the hours that I do. And I try to be very, very clear on that, because I also don't want, like, if they're burnt out, then, I don't want people to not enjoy their job. Recruiting is very rewarding. It's tough, but it is very rewarding. And I want them to feel the reward. And sometimes you don't feel that if you are just, every minute you're just doing something and you don't have time to catch your breath. So
Absolutely. And so it sounds like you've done a really good job helping your own team prioritize, right? And making sure that your team has a work-life balance, even though they're a lean team that's clearly working multiple different roles, multiple different jobs, and is handling very high volume recruiting.
Yeah, and on shorter weeks too, I'll cancel team meetings. It's important to meet as a team, but or maybe we do a quick 15-minute check-in or something if there's announcements, because I want to be careful too. I'm mindful on people's times. Like, everybody's meetinged out, right? We all have way too many meetings. So if I can take something off of their calendar or dismiss them from something and say, hey, if you don't want to be in this meeting, you are welcome to dismiss yourself from it, if that's time that you want. Because I think sometimes people also feel obligations to be at meetings because they've been invited. And I think sometimes people just are like, oh, well, I should include this person. But again, if somebody ever on my team said, I need this time to do this, and I feel like this is more of a priority, I would say absolutely go ahead and miss that meeting, unless it was, again, a very, very important meeting that was a higher priority than what else they were doing. So
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Theresa. We're 3 minutes over time. And so thank you so much for joining us. I
of
definitely
course.
really enjoyed this chat. Of course, we love having you as a client, but it was so lovely to have you on this webinar, sharing your thoughts with a larger group. Thank you to the audience, and thank you to everyone that joined. For everyone that did join, we will send you a recording tomorrow, and for the people that won't, we'll also provide a recording. On the people that had to leave early, we'll make sure that you get a recording, so you also get to hear Theresa's thoughts and learn from her experience. Thank you everyone for joining.
Thanks for having me. And, for everybody out there, I know right now recruiting is a challenge. So hang in there. I think every team is feeling just the stress and end of year stuff. And it's an interesting time right now. So hang in there. Just keep pushing forward and good things will come.
Absolutely. Thank you, and happy holidays to everyone. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.